consider saying no because it was so terrifying. But I really do speak from the bottom of my heart when I say that I'm just very grateful for all of you and all of the work that you do. And I felt I couldn't pass up the opportunity to come and say so, really. So I am the Chief Executive of the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. We're a small charity, and as a small charity CEO, I've realised over the last kind of few years that my job is in part strategy, so part strategy, part culture, and part doing other people's jobs really badly. And really, when you're being a chief exec in a small organisation, ideally you are the smallest cog in this big machine. So your job is to be that tiny cog that makes all of the other cogs move in the same direction, so that everybody's efforts are focused on that single goal. It's your job to articulate what that goal is and make sure that all of our time and energy is going in the right direction, and to set the culture so that all of those cogs keep turning up at work. But it's also true that there are lots of days when someone goes off sick or hands in their notice, and suddenly you've got a gap in the team and you find yourself running a focus group, building desks, writing tweets, or, heaven forbid, doing a VAT return. And I like to think in those circumstances, I kind of imagine myself as part of a SWAT team. So you parachute in and everybody's astounded by your incredible tweets or your skill with an Allen key, and then peace descends on the organisation and you hold back the tides of overwork and then go back to your day job and everybody thinks, isn't she great? In practice, I think what actually happens, and this is an analogy that my husband used with me that I'm not proud of, is it's more like a seagull. So you kind of have the bird's eye view, you spot a problem, you start squawking. You come zooming in, flapping, kind of making a mess, you steal someone's sandwiches, you leave, I won't say what he said, you leave mess everywhere, and then you disappear, and you hope maybe that something was better. So my little mantra in my head doing my job is always, be a little cog, not a seagull, which sounds completely and utterly like I've lost the plot, but that's kind of the way it works. So I had kind of first-hand experience of this recently, a few years ago, when our head of finance, our small organisation, left. And the day she handed in her notice was a dark day for us. And there's a happy ending because we advertised through the Charity Finance Group and found an incredible new head of finance, and she has written her contract in her own blood and she is never going to leave. But the dark days in between those two people made me realise more than I had ever before just what incredible work you all do, and that you are the invisible cogs within those machines that make all of the work of the incredible charity sector that we have possible, because if you weren't there, none of it would happen. And I've also been very aware that you, more than anyone else in the charity sector, could get paid a whole lot more if you went somewhere else. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving your skills and your talent to us. So I wanted to come and say thank you, but that actually isn't what the Charity Finance Group asked me to come and say, because that would be probably quite an egotistical brief to have said, could you just come and blow some smoke for everybody who works in charity finance? That's not what they asked me to talk about. They asked me to talk about what we actually do as a charity, which is we are here to try and tackle the link between money and mental health problems. So it's not the most cheerful of topics, and I am going to bring it back to what you do in your day job in a minute, but bear with me where I kind of set out a little bit the problem that we are here to try and solve. So people who are living with mental health problems, so that's 1 in 4 of us in this room, half of us across our lifetime. You're 3.5 times as likely to be in financial difficulty if you're struggling with your mental health. And that's for a variety of reasons. So when you're struggling with your mental health, your income is likely to go down. So it's harder to stay in work or make a benefit claim, it's harder to progress at work, to stay full time. All of those things are kind of quite easy to understand. But at the same time as your income is going down, your expenditure is likely to go up. Your costs get higher, life gets more expensive. So it's harder to shop around, it's harder to renew your insurance, it's harder to get a good deal on your energy, it's harder to have the time and the energy to plan a weekly shop and make sure that you can budget when you're really struggling with your mental health. So your income goes down and your expenditure goes up. You're a room of finance professionals. I don't think you need an income and expenditure statement to explain what's going to happen next. So income is going down, expenditure is going up, and at the same time, when you're really struggling with your mental health, your ability to manage the discrepancy between those two things is really reduced. So it's harder to understand your finances, it's harder to process complex information, your memory is affected. We often talk about how mental health problems affect how we feel. We don't very often talk about how they affect how our minds work. So if your short-term memory is affected, if you can't process complex information, if you struggle to pick up the telephone and ask for help, managing when things go wrong can be really hard. So it's no wonder that you end up in financial difficulty more often than not. But the relationship also goes the other way. So being in financial difficulty is pretty terrible for your mental health. As anyone who's run an organisation that's been in hard times will know, and the same is true when it happens to you personally. Debt has an immediate impact on our mental health and our well-being. People who are in financial difficulty are 3 times as likely to consider suicide. And 100,000 people in financial difficulty attempt to take their own lives every single year, which is just absolutely huge. And that impact is a mixture of the long-term sustained effect of poverty and low income, but also the short-term impact of some of the things that happened when you're in financial difficulty. So the debt collection activity, the kind of letters and telephone calls, and the going without essentials that we can experience when we're in that situation. So at Money and Mental Health, what we do is, at the heart of our organisation, is research. We try and understand every aspect of that relationship between money and mental health problems. We run a lived experience community of just over 4,000 people who have personal experience of mental health problems, who feed into everything that we do. If that's you, I would encourage you to sign up. We get in touch every week with new opportunities to share anything from what it's like switching current accounts to using NHS talking therapies. And the change that we bring about, some of it is big, some of it is small, but I'm proud of all of it. So we run campaigns. So for example, if you are using NHS mental health crisis services for your mental health, now thanks to one of our campaigns, for the duration of your care in mental health crisis services, you should be free from debt collection activity, fees, charges on your debts. Because we were seeing people being discharged from psychiatric hospital and going home to letters from bailiffs on their doorstep. That just feels like a complete injustice. And it's also a terrible way to support people to recover from a mental health crisis. So now we have something called mental health breathing space, which we campaigned for, which means that mental health crisis services can protect people from that debt collection activity. So that's a big change that we brought about. We've also worked on a lot of small changes. So we work hands-on with financial service providers and banks. We also work with energy companies, water companies, to improve what they do for their customers with mental health problems, both how they treat their customers, but also how their products are designed and what they look like. Small things like half of people who are struggling with their mental health find they can't pick up the telephone to call their bank. And that means heart palpitations, panic attacks. And actually, a third of us find it really hard to pick up the telephone to call their bank. So actually, those kinds of changes are things that benefit everybody. So the small changes there we're talking about are things like, could you just introduce web chat to be able to reach your vulnerable customer team rather than doing it all on the phone? So some big changes, some small changes, and some really very small changes. So I run a small organisation where I'm in a privileged position to be able to shape what it's like at work for the people within my team. And we've done everything that we can to reduce the impact that mental health problems and financial difficulty have on us in the workplace. Because it will be in your workplace too, even if you don't see it at the moment. So 1/4 of people in the workforce are financially insecure. 17 million people in the UK have less than £100 in savings. So there will be people in each of your organisations who are struggling financially, and you may not see it, but they will be bringing it to work every day. So for people who are finding things financially difficult, about half told us that they are working less carefully than normal. About a third told us that they are losing sleep, and about half said again that they were really struggling to concentrate on their day-to-day work. Now, I think that the charity sector is really special because we are all committed to doing good, not just in the work that we do, but in how we do our work. And even if you didn't have that commitment, understanding the impact that financial difficulty and mental health problems is having in your workplace and what you can do about it would be absolutely vital. But once you start to care about how you work and the environment you create for your teams at work, this becomes something that it's really obvious you have to focus on. So there are a few practical things that you can do immediately. So one of the things that we did very quickly at Money and Mental Health when we did this research was to try and dramatically reduce the upfront cost of work. So it sounds quite small, but one simple step we did immediately was we stopped doing collections for people's birthdays. And it sounds like a silly thing, but when you work in a relatively big organisation and you are struggling financially, the mental health impact, never mind the financial impact, of struggling weekly to put some money in that envelope or to transfer some money over for a collection is just something that we felt we didn't need to have in our workplace. We've also almost eradicated all upfront expenses. So we don't have petty cash and we don't really have expense claims other than in exceptional circumstances. So we issued corporate cards to everybody at a certain level in the organisation, and all expenses flow through those individuals. And it takes a tiny bit of getting used to, and you have to make sure you've got good controls on the use of your corporate cards, and we do discuss it with our treasurer quite regularly. But we still feel on balance that it's the right thing to do for our team, because having to pay up front for train tickets to go on a training course means that people who are struggling financially are not only less likely to go on the training, but also more likely to be worrying about it and agonising over when am I going to get my expenses paid, and it can be really humiliating for people. More structurally, if you have employees in your team whose income is unpredictable, who have shifts or different kind of scale of income month to month, there are tools that you can implement in your organisation to smooth their income. You could bring in payroll lending or savings. I'm currently working hard to scope a rent deposit loan scheme in our organisation. We're only 20 people. If we can manage to do that, then much bigger organisations can manage to do that too. We have one person who runs all of our finances, and I'm working with her at the moment to draft the terms of our rent deposit loan scheme, because it will mean that people who want to come and work in the charity sector will get a foot in the door to put down their first deposit on their rented flats in London in order to be able to come and do our internship, which does pay the London living wage. One of the simple things you can do is to talk about money at work and to talk about signposting to money and debt help, which we also don't very often do. And this is one thing that I think as leaders in our organisations, and I think you are all leaders in your organisations because you're the kind of people that get to come to fancy dinners, which to me means that you are in positions of privilege within your organisations without doubt, is to put yourself in the uncomfortable position. And I always try and think of it like this when I'm forcing myself to do something that feels really uncomfortable. So most of us, we're generous people, wouldn't think twice about donating £5 to an organisation that does something really important to make someone else's life better or someone else's day better. But sometimes it's not money that you need to give, sometimes it is literally your own discomfort. So can you put yourself in the position of having a conversation? If you know someone in your team is reducing their hours, is taking time off sick, is being made redundant, can you be the person that says to them, here's some signposting to some kind of money and debt help? It feels really uncomfortable. It feels like you're making an assumption about them and their circumstances. But what's the worst that's going to happen? The worst that's going to happen is that they will snap at you and say, that's none of your business, go away. And you feel really uncomfortable. But the best that could happen is that someone who is really struggling has just been offered the lifeline to go and get the help that they really need. The cost of your discomfort is not that great based on the benefit that you could get. And I remember this when someone came into our team one day with some bruises on their face, and I thought, I have got a choice here. Either I step up and I need to put myself in a really uncomfortable position and go and have a conversation with them about what's happening and are they okay, and do I need to help them, signpost them to some help and support, or I can do the more comfortable thing and assume that everything's fine, that I've created a really high trust environment and they can come to me if anything happens. And I had the really awkward conversation and it was nothing. And all that came out of it is I felt really uncomfortable, they felt slightly awkward, and then we all moved on. And I was really glad that I did it. So that's my kind of plea. And I think when you look at some of these really big problems, debt, poverty, suicide, mental health problems, it's really easy to feel powerless. And I think it's a really human instinct. When you look at a very big problem and you know I can't fix that, to look away, to feel really uncomfortable and to look away, to look at the news and to think I can't fix that problem that I can see there, and so the way I'm going to cope with it is not to engage with it today. And some days that's the right thing to do for your mental health, but there are some problems where some of it is in your control. So that was my only ask of you today, really, is to think about which bit of that is in your control. Could you change your organisation's expenses policy so that someone in your organisation who's never mentioned it might find real relief from not being out of pocket for a few weeks before payday for those train tickets? Could you have a look at your sick pay policy and see whether you can make it more generous for people who are in their probation period, for example, who are most likely to be struggling? Could you just have a think about tools like payroll lending and things like that? Because actually, this is quite small fry, really, when we're looking at the grand scheme of poverty and financial difficulty. But it's the stuff that we could do quite quickly, and that stuff does snowball. So that's really what I wanted to say. That and a genuine thank you. And also, the next time, I'm not ever going to advertise a finance job again because she's never going to leave, but the next time it does come up, please look at the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, because I do think that you and your profession are truly the secret lifeblood of the charity sector, and I'm very grateful that you invited me along this evening. Thank you very much.